Through the viewport, the distant stars seemed to flicker, as if watching the fragile vessel glide toward its fate. Inside, Ambassador Kevin Wayne sat at the helm of the diplomatic team, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension radiating from his companions. "Still time to turn back," Lieutenant Steve Smith muttered, his voice carrying a trace of dry humor. His sharp jawline and no-nonsense military uniform painted a picture of someone who was far more comfortable with battle plans than negotiations. Kevin didn't look away from the viewport. "If we turn back now, we might as well start digging graves for the Alliance. You know that as well as I do, Steve." Steve leaned back, arms crossed, his gaze lingering on Kevin. "I just hope your words are as sharp as the Soren think their blades are." Dr. Dominic Morgan, seated to the right, adjusted his spectacles nervously. He was a wiry man, perpetually fidgeting, his mind brimming with facts about alien languages and cultures. "It's not their blades I'm worried about," he said. "The Soren have destroyed fleets for less than what we're about to attempt. They don't see negotiations as a show of strength. They see them as weakness." Kevin finally turned, his piercing gray eyes locking onto Dominic. "That's precisely why we're going to do this differently. They've never faced humans before, and they've never faced me." The shuttle jerked slightly as it entered the gravitational pull of the Soren flagship. The looming behemoth filled the viewport, a monstrous construct of dark metal and violent red lights. Its design was almost predatory, like a massive creature lying in wait. Surrounding it were dozens of smaller ships, each bristling with weapons that could vaporize the shuttle in an instant. A sharp, guttural voice crackled over the comms. "Human vessel, you are entering sovereign Soren territory. State your purpose." Kevin pressed the comms button with deliberate calm. "This is Ambassador Kevin Wayne, representing the United Terran Alliance. We've come to discuss terms." A tense pause followed. Steve's hand instinctively moved to the sidearm strapped to his hip, though he knew it would be useless here. The voice returned, colder this time. "Proceed. But know this. Failure to amuse us will cost you more than your lives." The line went dead, leaving the weight of the threat hanging in the air. "Well," Dominic said, his voice cracking slightly, "that's encouraging." Steve shot him a look. "Focus. If this goes south, we'll need every second to figure out how to get out alive." The shuttle docked with a metallic clang, and the airlock hissed open. A wave of hot, humid air greeted them, carrying a faint metallic tang. The humans stepped forward into the Soren command chamber, their boots echoing on the polished obsidian floor. The room was cavernous, its walls adorned with jagged symbols that Dominic recognized as declarations of conquest. Towering figures lined the space, each Soren warrior clad in obsidian armor that glinted menacingly under the harsh red lighting. Their faces were a mix of reptilian and feline features, their glowing yellow eyes fixed on the newcomers like predators sizing up prey. At the far end of the chamber sat Commander Rorgale, his massive form reclined on a throne of twisted metal and bone. He was larger than the others, his armor adorned with intricate carvings that told stories of countless victories. When he rose, the floor seemed to tremble slightly under his weight. Kevin stepped forward without hesitation, his posture relaxed but purposeful. "Commander Rorgale," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today." Rorgale tilted his head, his sharp teeth glinting in what might have been a smile or a threat. "You presume much, human. I allowed this meeting for my own amusement. What could your kind possibly offer that would stay our hand?" Kevin smiled faintly, a calculated expression that teetered between confidence and provocation. "If I told you outright, where would the fun be in that?" The chamber fell silent, save for the faint hiss of distant machinery. The Soren warriors exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable, but the tension was palpable. Rorgale stepped closer, his towering form casting a shadow over the humans. "You dare to toy with us?" His voice was a low growl, each word heavy with restrained fury. Kevin held his ground, meeting the Soren leader's gaze without flinching. "Not toying, Commander. Simply offering something you don't often encounter. Someone who isn't afraid of you. The air in the room grew heavier, the Soren warrior shifting slightly as if preparing to strike. Steve's hand hovered near his weapon, his body taut like a coiled spring. Rorgale's growl turned into a deep, rumbling laugh. Interesting. You have courage, human, but courage alone won't save you. Speak your purpose, or I'll have your corpses displayed as trophies before your alliance. Kevin nodded, the faintest flicker of relief crossing his face before disappearing. My purpose is simple. We're not here to beg or bargain. We're here to propose something far more intriguing, a challenge. Rorgale narrowed his glowing eyes. A challenge? Yes, Kevin said, his voice gaining strength. You've conquered worlds, crushed fleets, and subdued countless species. But tell me, Commander, when was the last time you faced someone who truly surprised you? The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Rorgale didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter but no less dangerous. You tread on dangerous ground, Ambassador. If you think mere words will sway us. They're not just words, Kevin interrupted, his tone sharper now. They're an invitation. Humanity isn't here to grovel. We're here to offer you something you've been searching for, without even realizing it. A worthy opponent. Rorgale's expression shifted, his interest visibly piqued. The chamber was deathly silent, every Soren warrior watching intently. The tension was a living thing, coiled and ready to strike. Finally, Rorgale leaned back, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. You intrigue me, human. Perhaps you will entertain us after all. But know this. Entertainment comes at a cost. Kevin inclined his head slightly. We wouldn't expect anything less. The Soren commander's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound that was both unsettling and oddly approving. Kevin turned slightly, catching Steve's wary glance and Dominic's wide-eyed apprehension. As they were escorted deeper into the Soren flagship, Kevin allowed himself a brief moment to exhale. The first move had been made, and the game had begun. Whether they would survive, it was another matter entirely. Then on one side sat Kevin Wayne, his hands resting lightly on the table, as though the situation were nothing more than a routine diplomatic exchange. Beside him, Lieutenant Steve Smith sat rigid, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room for the slightest hint of danger. Dr. Dominic Morgan, trying unsuccessfully to steady his trembling hands, was carefully reviewing a datapad containing the linguistic nuances of the Soren language, as if it might hold the key to their survival. Across the table, Commander Rorgale loomed, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to stretch endlessly. His warriors flanked him, their glowing eyes fixed on the humans with predatory interest. Rorgale leaned forward, his clawed hand steepled under his chin. The air between them felt electric, charged with the unspoken threat of violence. You speak of offering us a challenge, Rorgale said, his voice a low, guttural growl. But you have yet to explain why we should not simply crush your species and take what we want. Words alone will not impress us. Kevin leaned back slightly, his expression unchanging. It's not words that will impress you, Commander. It's what they represent. Humanity's strength isn't in our weapons or our numbers. It's in our ability to adapt, to outthink, to endure. You've fought many enemies, but have you ever fought one who can match you in ways you don't expect? Rorgale's lips pulled back in what could have been a smile or a snarl. Bold words. Yet you sit before me unarmed, surrounded by warriors who could end you with a single command. Is this your adaptation? To gamble your lives on arrogance? Kevin met his gaze unflinching. It's not arrogance, Commander. It's understanding. You don't want to destroy us. If you did, we wouldn't be sitting here now. You're testing us, trying to see if we're worth your time. And I'm telling you we are. A low murmur rippled through the Soren warriors, a sound that might have been amusement or disdain. Steve's jaw tightened, his hand inching closer to the edge of the table, where he could spring into action if needed. Rorgale silenced his warriors with a single raised hand. His eyes locked onto Kevin, unblinking. "You presume much, human, but presumption alone is not without merit. Tell me, what would you offer that could stay my hand? What is this challenge you believe we seek?" Kevin hesitated for the briefest of moments, a calculated pause that drew Rorgale's attention like a predator scenting prey. "We offer the one thing no other species has dared to give you, resistance. Not in the form of fleets or armies, but in strategy, in ingenuity. We don't fight the way you're used to. We think differently, act differently. You may find that defeating us is not as simple as you believe." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rorgale stared at Kevin for what felt like an eternity, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair, his massive form settling with a creak of armor. "Resistance," he repeated, the word rolling off his tongue as though he were savoring its taste. "You believe this will interest us?" "It already has," Kevin said, his voice steady. "If it didn't, you would have killed us the moment we boarded your ship." A low growl emanated from one of the Soren warriors, a sound filled with impatience and contempt. "Why do we waste time with these fragile creatures, Commander? Their words are meaningless." Rorgale raised a hand again, silencing the warrior without even looking at him. His gaze remained fixed on Kevin, his expression one of quiet calculation. "You are clever, human, but cleverness alone does not win battles. You speak of resistance, yet you sit here offering no proof of it. Do you think we will simply take your word for it?" Kevin allowed himself a faint smile. "No, I think you'll test it, because that's what you want, isn't it? To find someone who can surprise you, to face an opponent who doesn't fall to their knees the moment you enter the room. That's why we're here, to show you that humanity is more than you expected." Rorgale's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it seemed as though he might lash out. The tension in the room was palpable, every breath feeling like a gamble. Then, to the surprise of everyone, he began to laugh, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You are bold, Ambassador. I will grant you that." He rose to his feet, towering over the humans like a living mountain. "Very well. If you wish to prove your worth, we shall give you the opportunity. But know this. Failure will mean not only your death, but the destruction of your kind. There will be no second chances." Steve stiffened, his hand finally resting on the grip of his weapon. "And what exactly does this opportunity entail?" he asked, his voice sharp. Rorgale turned his gaze to Steve, his yellow eyes gleaming with amusement. "You will learn soon enough, soldier. For now, you will return to your vessel. When we call for you, you will answer." Kevin stood, his movements calm and deliberate. "We'll be ready," he said, his voice carrying an edge of defiance. As the humans were escorted back to their shuttle, the weight of what had just transpired began to sink in. Steve finally broke the silence once they were safely inside. "That was the most reckless thing I've ever seen," he said, his tone a mix of frustration and reluctant admiration. Kevin allowed himself a small, weary smile. "Reckless, maybe, but necessary. If we're going to survive this, we have to show them we're not afraid to take risks." Dominic, still clutching his datapad, looked up with a worried expression. "And what if they decide we're not worth the risk?" Kevin glanced out the viewport, where the Soren flagship loomed like a dark omen. "Then we make them regret it." The shuttle disengaged from the docking bay, the humans retreating to the relative safety of their own ship. But even as they left, the weight of Rorgale's words lingered. The game was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The summons came abruptly, interrupting the fragile calm that had settled over the human delegation. A deep, resonant tone echoed through the Terran vessel's comms, followed by a terse message. "Your trial begins now. Return to the flagship." Kevin Wayne stood at the helm of the shuttle as it docked once more with the Soren command vessel. This time, there were no welcoming words, no formalities. The humans were escorted down a dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls lined with jagged symbols that felt more like warnings than decoration. Steve Smith walked just behind Kevin, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow, his hand never straying far from the weapon at his side. "Trial, huh? That's not ominous at all," he muttered under his breath. Kevin glanced back at him, his expression unreadable. "They're testing us." "Stay sharp." Dr. Dominic Morgan, trailing behind, clutched his datapad like a talisman. "I'd feel better if I knew what kind of test they had in mind. Physical? Psychological? Diplomatics?" His voice quivered slightly, betraying the fear he was trying to suppress. "It doesn't matter," Kevin said firmly. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." They were led into a massive chamber that was unlike anything they had seen before. The walls shimmered with a strange, iridescent light, and the floor was a vast expanse of polished black stone. In the center of the room stood Commander Rorgale, flanked by a dozen of his warriors. Rorgale's piercing yellow eyes tracked the humans as they entered. "You claim to offer resistance," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You claim to be worthy of our attention. Now, you will prove it." Kevin stepped forward, his posture steady, his gaze unwavering. "We're ready." Rorgale's lips curled into a predatory smile. "Confidence is admirable, Ambassador, but it is also fragile." He raised a clawed hand, and the chamber around them began to shift. The walls seemed to ripple and dissolve, replaced by a vivid simulation of an alien battlefield. Towering mountains loomed in the distance, and the air was thick with the smell of sulfur and ash. Steve's hand instinctively went to his weapon, but Kevin held up a hand to stop him. "It's not real," he said quietly, though the heat on his skin and the rumble of distant explosions suggested otherwise. Rorgale's voice boomed over the simulated landscape. "This is the world of Krethayar, where we annihilated a species that dared to defy us. Their resistance was spirited but futile. Let us see if you can do better." Before anyone could respond, a horde of holographic enemies began to materialize. They were grotesque creatures, all claws and fangs, moving with unnerving speed. Steve didn't wait for an invitation. He drew his weapon and fired, the energy blast tearing through the simulated attackers. "I hope you've got a plan, Kevin," he shouted over the chaos. Kevin's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The simulation was a test, not of their physical strength, but of their ability to adapt and think on their feet. "Steve, focus on covering our flank," he ordered. "Dominic, see if you can find a pattern in their movements." "There's always a pattern." Dominic, though visibly shaken, forced himself to focus on the creature's erratic movements. His fingers flew over his datapad, analyzing data in real time. "They're converging on points where we seem weakest," he said, his voice tight. "It's like they're testing our reactions." "Then let's give them something unexpected," Kevin said. He scanned the battlefield, his sharp eyes picking out key terrain features. "Steve, drive them toward that ridge. Dominic, see if you can trigger a collapse, anything to disrupt their formation." As the team executed his orders, the simulated creatures faltered. The ridge exploded in a shower of debris, cutting off a large portion of the enemy forces. Steve pressed the advantage, his precise shots taking out the remaining stragglers. When the last of the creatures disappeared, the battlefield dissolved, leaving the humans standing once again in the Sorin chamber. Rorgale observed them with a calculating gaze, his expression unreadable. "You are resourceful," he admitted, his voice carrying a note of reluctant respect. "But resourcefulness alone is not enough. Your actions were predictable, efficient, but lacking in true innovation." Kevin stepped forward, his tone sharp. "We didn't come here to play your games, Commander. This trial, this simulation, it's a distraction. If you wanted to destroy us, you would have done it already. So let's stop pretending and get to the point. What is it you really want?" The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut. Rorgale's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might lash out. But then, to everyone's surprise, he began to laugh, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You are bold, Ambassador," he said, his tone tinged with amusement. "And you are correct. This trial was merely a prelude. The real test is yet to come. Steve exchanged a wary glance with Kevin. And what exactly does that mean? Rorgale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his towering form casting a shadow over the humans. It means you will face a challenge unlike any you have encountered before. A challenge that will determine not only your survival, but the fate of your alliance. Kevin held his ground, his gaze steady. We'll face whatever you throw at us, Commander. But understand this. We're not here to prove ourselves to you. We're here to show you that there's another way. A way that doesn't involve endless war and conquest. Rorgale's expression hardened, his amusement fading. We shall see, human. We shall see. The humans were escorted out of the chamber, their minds racing with the implications of what had just transpired. As they boarded their shuttle, the weight of Rorgale's words hung heavily in the air. Dominic broke the silence as they lifted off. Do you really think we can change their minds? Kevin stared out the viewport, where the Soren flagship loomed like a dark omen. I don't know, he admitted, but we don't have a choice. If we fail, it's not just our lives on the line. It's everything we've fought to protect. Steve leaned back in his seat, his expression grim. Then we'd better not fail. As the shuttle sped away, the humans knew that the true battle was only just beginning. And this time, it wasn't just their survival at stake. It was the very future of humanity's place in the galaxy. The silence aboard the Terran vessel was broken by the crackle of the comms. Rorgale's voice, cold and commanding, filled the bridge. Humans, your final test awaits. Coordinates have been transmitted. Arrive or be erased. Kevin Wayne stood at the center of the bridge, his expression grim but resolute. Prepare the ship, he said, his voice steady despite the tension gripping the room. Steve Smith, standing nearby, nodded sharply and began issuing orders to the crew. As the vessel shifted into hyperspace, Dominic Morgan approached Kevin, clutching his datapad tightly. We're walking into a trap, Dominic said, his voice laced with unease. You know that, don't you? Of course I know, Kevin replied, his gaze fixed on the forward viewport. But if we back down now, we lose everything. Whatever this test is, we'll face it together. No more doubts, Dominic. The ship emerged from hyperspace to find itself in the orbit of a dying star. The fiery giant pulsed erratically, its surface roiling with violent solar flares. Surrounding it was an immense battlefield of derelict ships, a graveyard of past conflicts. At the center of the chaos loomed the Soren flagship, its massive silhouette backlit by the seething star. Rorgale's voice echoed once more over the comms. Welcome to the furnace. This is where the unworthy are forged or destroyed. You will face the trial of unity, a test not of your strength, but of your ability to work as one. Fail, and the star will consume you. Before Kevin could respond, the Soren flagship unleashed a swarm of drones. They spread out like a school of predatory fish, their sleek forms glinting in the harsh light of the star. Steve's voice cut through the tension. Incoming. Multiple hostiles closing fast. Evasive maneuvers. Kevin ordered, gripping the edge of the console as the ship lurched into action. Dominic, I need options. What are we dealing with? Dominic's fingers flew over his console, analyzing the data streaming in. The drones are coordinating using a hive mind system. They're fast, but their patterns are predictable. If we can disrupt their command network, we might be able to turn them against each other. Steve let out a low whistle. That's a big if. Document. Kevin's mind raced as the ship dodged and weaved through the swarm. It's our only chance, he said. Dominic, find me a weakness. Steve, keep us alive until he does. The battle was chaos. The drones moved with mechanical precision, their attacks relentless. The Terran vessel's shields flared under the onslaught, each hit driving home the desperation of their situation. Steve barked orders to the gunnery teams, his voice cutting through the cacophony like a blade. Target clusters. Don't waste shots on singles. Dominic suddenly shouted, his voice tinged with excitement. "I've found it! The command signal is being relayed through a central node. It's a modified Soren cruiser. If we can take it out, the entire swarm will collapse." Kevin nodded sharply. "Steve, plot a course to that cruiser. Dominic, patch the data to targeting systems. We'll only get one shot at this." The ship surged forward, engines burning bright as it barreled through the swarm. The drones reacted instantly, converging on the Terran vessel in a desperate attempt to block its path. Steve gritted his teeth as he pushed the ship to its limits, maneuvering through the chaos with reckless precision. "Shields at critical," a crew member called out, panic creeping into her voice. "We're almost there," Steve barked. "Just hold it together a little longer." The Soren cruiser came into view, its hulking form bristling with weaponry. Kevin leaned forward, his gaze locked on the target. "Fire everything we have," he commanded. "Take it down." The ship's weapons roared to life, unleashing a barrage of firepower that tore into the cruiser. Explosions rippled across its surface, and for a moment, it seemed as though it might weather the assault. But then, with a final, deafening blast, the cruiser's command node detonated. The effect was immediate. The swarm of drones faltered, their movements growing erratic before they began turning on each other in a frenzy of self-destruction. The battlefield fell eerily silent as the last of the drones were destroyed, leaving the Terran vessel drifting in the quiet aftermath. Rorgale's voice returned, his tone unreadable. "Impressive. You have passed the trial of unity, though not without cost. Few have managed such a feat." Kevin stood tall, his voice firm. "We didn't come here to prove ourselves, Rorgale. We came to offer you something greater than conflict. Look at what we achieved. Humans working together, adapting, overcoming. That's what we bring to the galaxy. Not war, but possibility." For a long moment, there was no response. Then Rorgale himself appeared on the hollow communicator, his expression unreadable. "You are unlike any species we have encountered," he admitted. "Your defiance is not born of ignorance, but of understanding. Perhaps there is something to be learned from you after all." Kevin stepped closer to the hologram, his gaze steady. "We don't have to be enemies, Rorgale. Together, we could achieve things neither of us could accomplish alone." Rorgale's gaze narrowed, and then slowly, he inclined his head. "Perhaps. But know this, human, alliances with the Soren are not forged lightly. You have earned our respect, but trust must be earned in kind. We're willing to earn it," Kevin said, a faint smile playing at his lips. Rorgale's image flickered and disappeared, leaving the humans alone once more. Steve let out a long breath, slumping into his chair. "Well, that was fun," he muttered. Kevin turned to his crew, his expression resolute. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning. We've shown them what humanity is capable of. Now, we build on that." Dominic nodded, his usual nervous energy replaced by a quiet determination. "It won't be easy, but then, nothing worth doing ever is." As the Terran vessel turned away from the dying star, the crew knew their journey was far from over. But for the first time, they felt the faint stirrings of hope, a belief that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could carve out a place among the stars.